Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the sixth YouTube session of the seventh fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 12 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. So I'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser. We have lots and lots of exclusive author goodies, but I'll tell you a little bit more later in the session. And you can, meanwhile, if you want to find out more about the Pixel Project and all the work that we do, go and visit our website, www.thepixelproject.net. Okay, so for this session, we have an amazing guest. We have Melissa Caruso. Hi, Melissa.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
I'm really glad to be here.
So Melissa is a fabulous fantasy author. She's the author of the Swords and Fire trilogy, which is an adult fantasy series of intrigue and magic from Orbit Books. And also she started the Rooks and Ruin trilogy, also from Orbit. So she's a fantasy writer, a tea drinker, a LARPer, a mom, and an all-around geek. So pretty much an awesome person. So Melissa has also generously donated a bunch of goodies to the stash of author goodies that we have set up on our Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. This is stuff that you guys who are watching can get your hands on. So let me tell you what they are. So the two bundles. The first is Melissa Caruso's Sword and Fire Goodie Bundle. So this contains a signed and personalized paperback set of The Tethered Mage, The Defiant Heir, and The Unbound Empire, plus one Swords and Fire bookmark and one Obsidian Tower bookplate, which is also signed. But somebody has already snapped this up. So we want to say thank you to Shai Ruparel. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you so much, Shai, for getting this bundle. Now, all of you other Melissa fans out there is another thing to be snapped up. So Melissa is offering a 30-minute one-to-one video chat. Now, this is available worldwide because it's online. So Melissa has very generously donated a 30-minute one-to-one video chat to be claimed by one Read for Pixels donor who is an aspiring author. So Melissa will be happy to chat about the art and craft of writing, the business of publishing with you, or if you're just a Melissa Caruso fan who would love to meet her via video chat, she's happy to chat about her books with you. It's a great opportunity to meet your favorite author and to get some insider information of some writing tips and publishing tips. So this session will be conducted in English. You may choose between Skype or FaceTime for the chat, but if you prefer a typed chat, Melissa is also happy to oblige. Okay, so this is still available. It's on our Rally Up page. I'll tell you how to get to the Rally Up page a little later. So please give generously. The fundraiser ends in October 2020, and all funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Okay, so we have a reading coming up. Melissa will be doing a reading, and we have a Q&A session. And you who are watching, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to ask Melissa questions. Just make sure you're logged on to your YouTube account, and you can type your questions in the chat box on the right of your screen. And Sam, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me and to read out to Melissa, and Melissa will answer them. Okay. So, Melissa, tell us what you're reading today.
Okay. Well, it was an interesting challenge because I know the goal is to find something that pertains to issues of that we face with sexism and things like that. Now, but my fantasy world is one that is sexism free, but I do have a villain in the Swords and Fire trilogy who is still kind of that guy, even though sexism isn't there. He kind of has that vibe. So I'm going to read a scene from my first book, The Tethered Mage, which introduces this villainous character. Prince Rulus did not appear at first glance to be mad. I had never met a witch lord's son before, but Vascondar's rulers had a certain reputation. The witch lords had begun as a handful of powerful and universally feared mages in the far north, long before the birth of the empire. Every 30 or 40 years, they'd engulfed a new domain in bloody conquest, raising a new witch lord to rule over it until they ran up against the Witchwall Mountains over 100 years ago. The witch lords had left a scarlet-edged impression on my grandparents' generation with their ruthless cruelty in war, and even the Vascandran diplomats and merchants I'd met spoke of them in hushed tones, making the old peasant sign to ward against demons. I'd heard them called mad often enough that I'd steeled myself for tea with a lunatic. Prince Reuben, however, greeted his guests with perfect manners, a vision of civility. He cut a genteel figure in his impeccable blonde ponytail and high-collared coat of soft black leather. The angular designs of its violet embroidery set off the matching ring of the mage mark in his storm gray eyes. The Vascandran ambassador danced attendance on him like a fawning servant. Perhaps 24 guests, split between young Riverans of patrician birth and visiting nobility from other cities of the empire, milled around the ambassador's great hall. The architecture was far more austere than the townhouses of Riveran nobility, with dark beams and a high vaulted ceiling. Candles flickered on little round tables set with silver and draped with violet brocade. I didn't want to be here. False laughter floated up to the rafters, and the stuttering candles and weak sunlight streaming through the high windows did nothing to appease the gloom of the hall. The place might look nothing like the Riveran drawing rooms I knew, but it was yet another party my mother was making me attend, full of near strangers with whom I had nothing in common. For this, I'd called off my training at the Mews. Lady Amalia Cornaro, it was the prince himself, his Riveran accented but flawless. It's time to sit for tea. Won't you join me at my table? He laid his fingertips against my elbow in diffident guidance. Time to be charming. What did charming people do? I tried to smile. I'd be delighted. The tables were set for 4, but no one else sat at ours. A Riveran lordling veered in our direction, eyeing an empty seat. The Vascandran ambassador himself graciously directed him elsewhere. Glancing from this interception to the avid glitter in Reuben's mage-marked eyes, I had the sudden gut-tightening feeling that this was a trap. So, Reuben laced his fingers together and set his chin on them, staring at me. You are the unexpected falconer I have heard so much about these past few days. The rule breaker. I shifted uncomfortably. My corset stays dug into my lap. I never intended to become one, I assure you. Ha! He flashed his teeth in a vulpine smile. You and we are beyond the reach of rules. They are beneath us. Don't you agree? I doubted the Doge would. There are those who would argue law is the foundation upon which the serene empire stands. Reuben chuckled. Laws. Laws are an armor of words in which fools gird themselves. They provide no more protection than the wind spent to speak them. A Vascandran servant arrived with a bone china teapot and began filling our cups. The prince didn't lean back to give him room. In Vaskandar, the merest whim of a witch lord is greater than law. A witch lord wears his domain like a glove. The land itself bows to his will. It is why your empire has never conquered us. His gesturing hand glanced off the servant's elbow, and a few drops of tea spilled on the tablecloth. A soft gasp sucked between the servant's teeth. Quick as a striking viper, Reuben seized the man's wrist. The teapot crashed to the floor, shattering into leaf-patterned pieces. The servant paled. Your Highness, he whispered, forgive me, please. The conversation in the hall paused a brief moment, then resumed. Reuben did not let go of the man's wrist. For instance, he continued conversationally, his eyes with their violet mage mark still turned on me. My father is a fur witch. They call him the Wolf Lord of Kazarath. If this fool spilled at his table, the wolf pack that guards our hall would rip him apart. The servant's hand spasmed as if in pain, and a wild grimace stretched his features, but he made no sound. I half rose from my chair. Reuben still didn't release him. My aunt is a green witch, so she might prefer to impale him with thorns. I, on the other hand, am a skin witch. You would call all 3 of us vivimancers, but in Vaskandar, we consider the distinction important. Humans, not animals or plants, are my specialty. So I could melt the bones in his arm, or rot his flesh, or stop his heart. I couldn't bear the naked terror on the servant's face any longer. I cut my words across Reuben's like a knife. But you aren't in your father's hall. You are in Rivera. The spark in Reuben's eyes sharpened to a hard gleam. Sorry, I skipped a page. Sorry. A delighted smile lit Reuben's face. But you see, it doesn't matter. Power is power. I am a skin witch, and I wear no silly golden bracelet like your tame falcons do. No one here could stop me from doing whatever I wish. And I am a prince of Vaskendar, beyond the authority of your council or your doge. They would not dare attempt to seize me over such a trifle as a servant's life. The servant's lips moved, mouthing, please, 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 over and over again, but no sound came out. Reuben's grip seemed loose enough, but a trickle of blood ran down the man's wrist. I forced myself to ease back into my chair as if I didn't care what happened to him. The graveyards of Aruvia are full of powerful men who thought they could predict what the Doge and the Council would or wouldn't dare. I shrugged my stiff shoulders. But that's irrelevant. You won't do any of that, because it would be uncouth. A gentleman does not make a scene and ruin a party thrown in his own honor. Ah, Reuben nodded thoughtfully. You make a fine point, Lady Amalia. He released the servant at last. I glimpsed a red handprint on the man's wrist before he pulled it into his sleeve. He bowed to the prince and bent to clean up the teapot, as if the threat of death were a normal part of his workday. Perhaps it was. I resolved never to move to Vaskendar, even if Rivera sank into the sea and the rest of the empire were on fire. Let's stop there.
That was great, especially like the cameo appearance from your
Yes.
pet. So cute. Yeah, so I remember reading that and thinking, oh, this man, all that hubris and just believing he can do anything he wants with impunity. But there are lots of men like this in the world,
very
unfortunately.
Which is why I thought of him in conjunction here.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the questions. We'll come back to talking about men later, but let's talk about women first. So your books feature some really fantastic female protagonists. That's Amalia and Zara and Rix. They are complex, compelling, very human characters with agency. Their personalities and attitudes and understanding of the world evolve as their stories progress. Could you tell us who or what are your inspirations for your female characters?
So for me, I just had lots of, a lot of my characters have always tended to pop into my head as women since I was a kid. I don't know if it's just, because I'm female, but I do have a lot of strong women in my life. I haven't directly based any of my characters on them. My mom, so a lot of my mom's brothers and sisters who've read my book assume that she's the inspiration for La Contessa, who is this very powerful and domineering figure who is the mom of Amalia in my first book. She's not. My mom's much nicer to me. Anyway, but certainly ever since I was a kid, I've had a role model, let's say, of women as being very powerful, commanding, and control figures in my life in a much nicer way. And I don't know. I just always, I think a lot of times, so many characters have jumped into my head as female that I then have to be like, oh, I should some boys in this story. Maybe
Okay.
I could a boy.
Okay, so all genres have their share of female stereotypes and tropes, especially fantasy. Now, your stories are set in a fantasy world that sort of mirrors ours in Renaissance times, you would say, and it could easily have been full of tropes. How do you break stereotypes to create a female character with agency who deals with the world around her, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls?
So I think when you're trying to have your female characters avoid falling into tropes, I think one of the very first things you need to do is have lots of female characters. I think that a lot of times when you have, I know we've seen time and again when you have a movie that comes out and it has, a lot of big actiony kind of characters, and there'll only be one female character, and she winds up carrying this full burden of having to be the perfect woman somehow. And you can't avoid falling into all tropes. There's almost bound to be something that you at least touch on with a character. So I mean, part of it is just having lots of female characters, both in the foreground and in the background, and I think also just challenging your assumptions a lot. For instance, I mean, I've always thought of a lot of foreground characters for who are female, either warriors, leaders, things that normally we wind up not letting women be, but also ones who take standard female roles but fulfill them. She's this
Mhm.
again stereotype, the ones that our culture expects, but fulfill them with grace and skill, and that it's not looked down on. And that's great. But the place where I found myself falling down was often with background characters, like when you have a bar brawl and everybody's a guy. You're sort of reinforcing certain stereotypes unintentionally. Just it's so deeply rooted in our heads.
Mhm.
Or just the faceless guards on the palace door. I would wind up having them be men, and I have to challenge myself and say, no, I can't make those assumptions. I have to look out for what I'm doing with what genders I give my characters and make sure that I'm not unintentionally, even as a woman who's been pretty feminist since I was a kid, that I'm not unintentionally reinforcing these deeply ingrained stereotypes.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That's good advice, actually. Okay, so one of the interesting aspects of this world that you've created is mages in the Empire are kept on tight leashes. They're not allowed to use their powers without permission of the person who controls them, and they're sort of confined to a place where they live. So one of the main driving points in the plot of the Tethered Mage is that a young woman is captured, her powers are controlled, and to be used as the Empire sees fit. It can be seen as a form of slavery, and in the story, it's a woman put in these metaphorical chains. Why did you decide to write this kind of story?
So I was I originally was inspired to write it thinking about how we tend to portray magical power in fantasy, and I was thinking about, okay, well, if you actually had a society, if you look at historically how how nations have always attempted to control power,
Mhm.
and how the possession of a resource often will give a nation an edge to become powerful and dominant, and and they'll wind up conquering neighboring nations and that sort of thing. And I was thinking, all right, well, if you have this kind of situation where people inherently are possessing, are born with the kind of power that can affect nations and move them, well, what sort of societies and what sort would you see arise from that? So there are two main countries in this world.
Mhm.
There's one where the mages are in control because they have the power innately and they've seized it, and then there's the Empire, which where they, at least at this point in the trilogy, where they have uh, sort of turned that on its head by conscripting everybody who's born with magical power.
Mhm.
Um, and I wanted to sort of, I mean, obviously, it's not a nice thing that they're doing. Nations are rarely nice when they're uh, attempting to control and monopolize power, uh, and empires are rarely nice when
Yeah.
they're attempting to become the most powerful country for reasons that are rarely altruistic, even if they convince themselves that they are. So I guess I was trying to look at it from that perspective. It originally evolved as an alternate history, trying to imagine what our world would look like if there were people born with magical power in the way that it might have evolved, and then it turned into its own alternate universe because I had too many ideas that headed off in that direction.
Okay, cool. So your stories, they definitely pass the Bechdel test with the inclusion of complex relationships between the women and, of course, their conversations. But why do you think that many science fiction and fantasy authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men?
Well, I think I think I don't know why people keep doing this. It drives me kind of crazy. Um, I think that some of it is just part of it is just that people tend to unconsciously copy what they've seen, and we have so many of our media have just don't even have enough female characters to have a conversation with each other, and it tend to be very male centered. I think when you have stories that are told by women, they are less likely to do that. I think, you know, I think that. I think that it's easy when you are, and I, obviously I can't say this for sure because I'm a woman, but I'm assuming when you're a man and you're surrounded by a culture that is just showing you books and movies everywhere that have mostly male characters and mostly male protagonists, that you absorb that, and if you don't actively challenge it, you're going to tend to regurgitate that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you mean to or not, even if you're just not even intending to be sexist, but that's just going to tend to be what comes out. But it's true that I think that we've internalized it to the degree that I think you often will even see books written by women where there aren't really a lot of strong female friendships. I think that we've internalized a lot of the New Girl narrative where women are seen as in competition with each other. But I think there's a real hunger for good female friendship stories out there. That's one thing I just hear people saying all the time is that they really like the female friendship that my books center on, or that they're hungry for that sort of thing and looking for more stories like that. So,
So what could you suggest for writers who want to write female relationships and conversations realistically?
well, I mean, I think honestly, women are people.
Yeah.
Write them like you'd write any other character, who has their own motivations and hopes and fears and their own sources of conflict. I think that people tend to get into more trouble when they're too hung up on a character's gender, regardless of what that gender may be. And I think we write best when we think about our characters as people, without trying to say, oh, I have to make this character toxic, or like a man, or like a non-binary person for that matter. So yeah, I just treat them with the same respect and give them the same depth and nuance that you would give any other character, and don't make it weird by trying to make them talk like a girl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your female characters likable or relatable? And have you ever gotten any flack for making a female character not likable enough?
Uh, I haven't gotten any flack to my face. I mostly don't read reviews, so I have no idea. There may be ones in there who are, not all my female characters are likable. I've heard some readers have different opinions over which female characters are likable or not likable in my books. In terms of feeling pressure, um, I haven't. I've been very fortunate in that all my agent and my editors that I've had, and everyone who I've worked with in a professional capacity, have been all in favor. Nobody has ever pressured me to do anything like that professionally. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of feeling it from society, um, I don't know. I haven't tried to write what might be considered a really unsympathetic viewpoint character
Mm-hmm.
yet. So if I did that, I might potentially, um, I might feel some of that, which is unfortunate. I like to think that I would challenge it, and I certainly, I mean, ever since I was a kid, I've been pushing back against the idea that girls should be nice and quiet and
Mm-hmm.
make people like them, and so that hasn't been a concern of mine, except perhaps to push against it for most of my life. So I think I'd probably feel the same way if I were trying to write a really edgy, unlikable female character too.
Yeah. So I'm also wondering, there are female characters in your stories who are in very powerful positions. So, like, for example, they might run a city or might run the empire. Have you ever got any comments that this is unrealistic because it's supposed to be, like I said before, it's a sort of a reflection of historical our historical world in the Renaissance, and it's unrealistic to have women in these positions?
So I try again. I have avoided reading the kind of comments where those would likely be appearing, because I like to keep my blood pressure nice and low. But I've seen those comments made frequently on other people's books, and especially anything that has a historical aspect to it. And honestly, everywhere you look in history, wherever there has been a patriarchy that has tried to deny women power, there have always been women who have found ways to take that power
Mhm.
away, and who have pushed back. And a lot of times history hasn't necessarily given them credit. but they've always been there. And so anytime someone says, "Oh, it'd be unrealistic to have a woman in charge," well, okay, maybe that's not the average, but we're not writing books about average people mostly anyway. We're writing books about interesting, exciting people. So, what's more exciting than someone who's pushing back against sexism to claim a role that someone might be trying to deny them. But I haven't gotten a pushback to my face about women in powerful roles. I'm sure there are people who have thought my books were not their cup of tea for that reason, and those people were never going to be my readers, honestly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We have a question from the audience, from Misty306. Hi, Misty. So, question about your books. Assuming that both Swords and Fire and Rooks and Ruin take place within the same universe, can we expect a timeline after the completion of the current trilogy?
That sounds like something that I should totally put on my website. Really handy. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, but that sounds like it would be a good thing to put in a little extra section on my website.
Yeah.
The Rooks and Ruin takes place 150 years after Swords and Fire, which I did because I thought I should give my Swords and Fire characters, like, I should give the world some time to be okay before I messed it up again. After everything I put them through.
Yeah, a timeline sounds fun, actually. It'd be nice to have one. Okay. All right. So let's talk about men. So the male and female relationships between the characters in your book are generally quite equitable. The society you've created views men and women as equal. Of course, there are student characters who are a little creepy, or like we saw Rugen just now, but generally equitable. Now, you mentioned in your recent AMA that you prefer to write a world without sexism and misogyny and patriarchy because you find it more fun writing worlds where women can just go be their own badass awesome selves without having to deal with that. So, which is really cool. So, do you think it's better to write a world where everyone thinks it's normal that female characters have power or drive plots forward, an ideal world, or do you think people should write patriarchy and sexism to reflect the real world?
I think both are really important. I think it's great to have. I mean, I like to write ones where nobody has to deal with sexism because that's it just, like I said, it lets me write them just going off and doing whatever without having to deal with that way down. But I think it is also really important to write to have books where people are standing up to sexism or struggling against sexism, because it is something we face in the real world. And I know, like, when I was a kid, for instance, there were some books I read, like The Hero and the Crown by Robin McKinley was one of my favorites. And she's dealing with some of that. And it just, sometimes seeing characters stand up successfully to that can be really inspiring, especially when I was a kid. Or there be just even little things like in it's not a fantasy book, but in The Westing Game, which was one of my favorite books. It's a mystery when I was a kid. The main, well, there's a lot of different characters, but my favorite main character when I was a kid, Turtle, would run around and just kick the boys who annoyed her shins, and that was probably more inspiring than it should have been to little me. There may have been some shins kicked in my youth, but just that idea that, like, you didn't have to take it from people, that you could push back was great to see too. And so I really do think we need both sort of the model of, like, look, this is what we can have. If we can get rid of sexism, or just like if we can somehow free ourselves from it, and also here's how you fight back, and for that matter, to create empathy for readers who haven't had to face sexism, so that they can see, okay, no, this is what we have to deal with. It's hard. I think that it's hard to. If you haven't experienced that yourself, I think that fiction is a great way to create empathy and help people who haven't had that experience have something of that.
Yeah. Okay. So your male characters, like I said, are respectful of women, their thoughts, their decisions, and they're also fine with expressing emotions, which you don't find very often in fiction. So some examples are there's Martello, who is a soldier, but he feels terrible when he has to kill somebody, which any human would, you would hope. And there's Faust, who is a primary caregiver for his child while his wife works full time. And there's so many more examples of men like this. So, do you think that framing how stories describe men away from the hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways that science fiction fantasy writers can break away from all these toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Absolutely. Um, I've been thinking, so way back, before I was a published writer, there was a point where I did a survey in the LARP community I was part of, as part of an academic paper I was writing in college, about how people sort of viewed gender roles in the LARP we were taking part in. And one thing that surprised me at the time, but that really changed my thinking and informed how I write characters ever since, was there were a number of male respondents who said, I feel a lot of pressure not to play a healer, and not to play a character whose role is supportive or nurturing. There's a lot of pressure on men to play fighters and only fighters, and not to play supportive characters. And I thought that that was revelatory, that there were these men out, because again, I'm a woman. I hadn't had, I'm a cis woman. I hadn't had that perspective. And it was revelatory to me that this is, it's hurting men, almost
Yeah.
in a lot of ways it's hurting women, and that we're suppressing people who really want to play nurturing, character, to be nurturing, to be supportive, and then we're just telling them, no, you can't have this. And that really made me want to make sure that I also had, that I didn't write men who were stereotypes and all just, tough guys, or
Mhm.
jerks who or stoic or whatever. And so plus there's the fact that I also find that to be very attractive to character, not necessarily in the romantic sense, but I mean, yes, that too, but to have a character who has that was not necessarily afraid to show that vulnerable side, who has emotions, and who is nurturing, and just to not have that for the entire gender seems wrong.
Mhm. Yeah, you're right. It's I mean, if you're a human, you should be able to express all your emotions, right? And you're right, it does hurt men as well. And isn't it horrible to be told that you can't be something because you're a man or because you're a woman,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see more role models for men and boys who are nurturing, and who express that. More dads,
Yeah.
more, puppy raisers. I mean, people who are soft, or who are strong but are not afraid to show their feelings. Like, there's so many other character types that we
Yeah.
rarely ever see that are great.
And so much more interesting than this like manly man with no feelings.
And you see all those great male actors out there who have to just stand there looking stoic and not having facial expressions in movies. Like, oh, come on, let them have feelings.
Yeah. Oh, the amount of times I've watched a film or a TV series where there are these two characters who are best friends or they're brothers, something, and something horrible happens and they save each other's lives, and you're like, tell him you love him, But of course, no, they stand there with like no expression on their face and looking out into the distance because they're a man.
Yeah.
Like, oh, come on. Okay, anyway, so speaking of, do you think that eventually this violent alpha male manly man type character would ever phase out of SFF as cultures worldwide start kicking out toxic masculinity?
Gosh,
Or you don't? Or
that last
do you think is one of the stereotypes that would stick around for much longer than expected? Or do you think it's a necessary stereotype, just to show people, the difference?
yeah, I'm sure it'll never totally disappear, because there are people who are like that. But it would be really, I would love to see it less. I would especially love to see it less lionized, and held up as something positive. I really hope that we'll continue to change and have fewer cases of toxic masculinity presented as the ideal. I think that we'll always have characters like that, just because we'll always have lots of different types of characters. But boy, I really hope that we can hold up other ideals and other kinds of masculinity to be examples for kids to find. And
Yeah.
you do see some of that. Like I think that they do. I mean, you think about, for instance, the way. I mean, we got a little here in the Marvel movies, the way Thor is portrayed, for instance, is, they could have gone toxic masculinity with him so easily, but they didn't.
Mhm.
And that's great. And I think we're seeing a bit of a shift away from it. I hope that the shift will continue.
Yeah. It makes the character much more interesting, like you said. Yeah. So stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change. Let's talk about writing stories and genre. In your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
I think, so first of all, I think that one of the key things I wish everybody would do is, if you are going to have violence against women in your story, to just treat it with the due gravity and respect. I think that so much of a shift, it would make such a big difference if people would just stop sensationalizing violence against women. Just even that, I think, would be such a big step towards normalizing the idea that it's really bad. I think that we get desensitized to it because everywhere it's sort of just used as a sensational thing, or for shock value, or just as a really cheapy thing to be like, oh, this is a bad guy. Look how bad he is. Look how he treats women. And if we didn't just use it as this cheap shortcut, and if we didn't sensationalize it and almost glamorize it, I think that would make a really big difference in how people think about it and how accepting they are towards it. And as creators and storytellers, I think it's a responsibility we have. And also, just I think it's always good to avoid being preachy, because nothing will. Well, I shouldn't say nothing. I think it tends to push readers away if you sit down and like, well, look at that guy. He just did a bad thing. Let's talk about why. Like if you kind of pull back out of the story and have like, remember, kids, don't do this, then it's people are going to disconnect from the story. I think it's better to let to just always treat violence against women with as something that is bad and not sensational, and also with the gravity that it deserves as a topic, and not just let it be cheap and quick, but without lecturing. Nobody likes a lecture.
Okay. Yeah, it's a bit of a it's a bit tough. It's a bit of a tough question. Yeah. But okay, anyway, the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books. It could be epic fantasy, urban fantasy, paranormal romance. Certainly, in some subgenres of fantasy, such as grimdark, women are still fridged as a catalyst for a male character's development, or rape is used as a shorthand for showing how brutal the world is, like you were just saying.
Yeah.
Do you think it's an issue that writers in the genre have started tackling successfully in recent years?
Do I think that they've started tackling successfully? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like to think that there's been more of a shift, but I think it still definitely happens. I'll admit that I personally do not read a ton of grimdark, and part of the reason is that the grittiness doesn't sit well with me. So I can't speak to grimdark specifically, especially to recent grimdark. But
you do find it anywhere, really, even on TV and in films. Yeah.
I mean, I would like to say that I wish there'd been more of a shift than there has been. Let's put it that way. I think that people are starting to be more aware, and that consciousness is slowly trickling through, that maybe this isn't a great way to do things. But I think that you still see it. You still do see it a lot of the time. They're like, oh, here's my, the only female character in the story is the one who gets killed off brutally in order to motivate the hero, and he has a moment staring sadly into the rain, and then he goes on a murder spree, and then we never see another one again. And like, it would be nice if we could completely move on past that. But I think there's still a lot of work we need to do collectively in that area, sadly.
Do you have any suggestions for fantasy authors who wish to include violence against women in their books?
I I think that the key is going to be so, and I don't, so I haven't included, and I don't plan to include violence against women in my book. So, uh, I'm not necessarily your best authority on this one, but I think the key is just to ask yourself why you're including this, and ask yourself, is this an important, you know, why is it important to the story? Am I doing this just for shock value to show you what a bad guy this is, or to give my male main character motivation, or is this important to the arcs of the female characters? Or it's, think over why you're doing this, and if you're especially if you're a male author. I think that if you're a female author, you're probably less likely to just throw that in there because it's hard. It's something that's hard to write and hard to grapple with for women. Whereas I think it's very easy if you haven't been either on the receiving end or afraid of being on the receiving end, just throw it in there. It's like, oh yeah, this is a bad thing. But yeah, and I would also say if you're going to put it in, and especially if you're a male author, I would get a sensitivity reader, and pay them, because that's a hard thing to read for anybody who can be a sensitivity reader, and make sure that you're treating it in a way that is not going to be horrible.
Yeah. Do you think that including violence against women in stories can help move the conversation forward in a constructive way?
I think it can, in that, if you're getting people to think as opposed to react, that's always good. Usually good. I can't think of any serious words out of the top of my head, but and I think it can be important to create more empathy. I think it can be important so that survivors can tell their stories, directly or indirectly. Um, so I don't think that we should all. I mean, I personally don't include violence against women in my books, but I certainly don't think that everyone shouldn't. But I think it should never be included as just a knee-jerk thing. I think it should be a conscious decision, and you know why you're putting it in there, and I think it can help. Yeah, yeah. I just think you have to be doing it in a conscious way and aware that you are going to have readers who have suffered through abuse and anything, whatever you're inflicting on your characters. Some of your readers will have gone through that, and be aware of that, and engage with it in a way that is ultimately going to be constructive in your situation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good advice. So I just want to put a little comment from one of the audience. So Chloe Merchant says, tough question.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure which question exactly Chloe is referring to, but sorry for asking tough questions, but these are the questions that need to be asked and addressed. Yeah. I'm glad everyone is listening carefully. So, okay, so let's talk about geek culture. Geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male-dominated, despite there being a rising number of prominent, well-respected, well-known female authors. Plus, there's still plenty of hostile, misogynistic, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. What do you think should be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics, gaming, books, cons, more welcoming for women and girls?
So I think one thing that I have seen in person is that it really makes a big difference, a huge difference in terms of the culture of any geek community when you have women in prominent roles within it, or female presenting people. Like, for instance, when I was in college, I was part of a gaming society, and it was about half female, and this was a while ago. I'm 45, so so 25 years ago, and it was about half women, and we had a great culture in that gaming group. And I think part of the reason was that we had a lot of female GMs, we had a lot of female officers in the club, so that
Mhm.
could know that they were going to be welcomed. And I think if you look around at your geek community and there's not, whatever your smaller geek community is, whether it's your gaming table or your sci-fi fantasy club or whatever, and you see that there's no women there, or not a lot of women, I think it's important to ask yourself why. Because it's not because women aren't interested, which is something you hear certain people throw out saying, oh, well, women aren't into this. Well, no, we are. We really are here.
Yeah.
If you don't see women in your geek space, it's because they don't feel welcome, and they have gone to other places where they do feel welcome. And you need to make culture changes. You need to sort of ask yourself why. For instance, again, I'm going to look at my LARPing career here. I ran a game where a lot of my major NPC characters who were generals or leaders were women. And I had a lot of women who chose to play fighters in that game, a lot more than I saw anywhere else. And I think a lot of it was just they knew it was safe. They could see that there was female leadership, and they knew that nobody was going to get away with giving them any kind of guff about that. So I think that helps. If you're putting together a geek space, make sure that you are including women in prominent positions. If you're making a list, look at the gender and racial composition. I know that's off topic, but composition of your list of like the best X, or when you're giving recommendations or seeking recommendations, I think it's very common for people to fall back on this sort of same male and white canon. But that's not the only canon. Like there's huge female authors who are immensely influential in science fiction and fantasy, which just boggles my mind that they don't get brought up a lot of the times. Like, I mean, for me as a kid growing up, my big, I was looking at Anne McCaffrey, Robin McKinley, Mercedes Lackey, like they're huge. They had enormous, and we got Friendly Dragons from Anne McCaffrey. Like that's huge, but people don't bring her up, and I wonder why, So I really think just everyone should get in the habit of just doing a check when you're making some kind of public posting or list or putting together a panel. Just take that second to be like, okay, wait a minute. Do I have unconscious bias that's making this turn out gender imbalance? And when you see, when we give those voices platforms, and when you're not just looking at a sea of bearded white dudes, then people are going to see a different face in fantasy, and it's going to trickle down to a subconscious level, hopefully, and get a much more positive and inclusive. People won't be able to say, "Oh, women don't do that," if they're seeing women doing it everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, sort of related. Many people have commented, as you yourself have mentioned in your recent AMA, that female and female identifying authors often get overlooked or miscategorized as young adult, which I think has happened to you as well. So do you have any thoughts about this situation, how it could be counteracted?
Yeah, so almost every adult fantasy author I know who is female presenting has gotten miscategorized as YA. It's ridiculous. People who write very, very adult, like grimdark fantasy will get miscategorized as YA. Like for me, it's a little more understandable because my works are actually a bit of a crossover. But I think that again, it's something people just have to kind of be aware. Like if you think that a female author is YA before you go publicly stating that, maybe just go check. It's very quick and easy to check. And sometimes just getting that, just like you would check anything else about a book, right? You might check to see what it's about, or the year of publication, or get the name of the author's, the spelling of the author's name correct. Maybe also go check and make sure that you have the category right before you go putting it on a young adult list or saying that it's young adult. And then one problem is that I think it really it can wind up hurting female and female presenting authors, because a lot of people assume that the books aren't for them if they're reading adult, or I mean, almost worse, assume it is for them if they're a teenager and go read something that's just like really not meant for teens. And
why do you think it happens though? Why this miscategorization and so much of it?
I can only assume that people are just making, okay, so there's a couple things going on here. And like the one word answer is sexism, right? But I think there's a couple things going on. And one is that people, so you'll notice that young adult has a lot more very dominant female authors there who are giant bestsellers. And I think it's that people are willing to accept women's success in anything to do with children. So that women are, okay, it's okay for women to be wildly successful in kids' books, which is, whereas, in this adult books, especially in fantasy and science fiction, which people insist on seeing as male dominated, even though it really hasn't been historically. If you look at the writers, I think that people are less willing to accept that a writer they've heard of is being dominant in the adult field there if they've got a female name. I know a lot of female and assigned female at birth, non-binary authors who have feminine names who use their initials instead of their first name because they know they'll get better sales. And I won't deny, I've wondered if I went by if I used a pen name and I'm Michael Caruso, would I sell more books? I don't know.
Unfortunately, it's still a reality. Okay, so moving on. Parents, let's talk about parenting. Parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. Now, you're a parent yourself. What do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations and to get boys involved in helping to do so?
I think that there's really a lot that parents can do. I know as the parent of girls, I've certainly seen lots of cases where even when they were really tiny, that there would be boys saying things that they heard somewhere, and I can only assume at home, like, everything from, oh, blue is a boy's color, or, oh, girls can't do that, girls can't, and they would come home and say, somebody said that girls can't be president, and I'd be like, yes, they can, and things like that. I think that it's really important for the parents of so I think it's important for the parents of boys to give their kids examples of strong women growing up and to never to let them see those examples so that they won't question that women can be strong, can fill these different roles, and also for that matter to teach to make sure that everybody both of any gender understands about basic things like consent. I know that that's something I try to drill into my girls too. And I tell my girls not to make assumptions about boys that are going to accidentally enforce the pressure that the boys are under to have to fit this toxic masculinity archetype. I tell them I tell my girls never to tease boys for crying, for instance. I think that's something really important parents of girls can do, or never to make fun of them for being like, not to expect boys to be like tough or athletic and to be supportive of them when they're being sensitive, and not and to stand up for kids who are being teased and things like that. And also, I've had cases where I've just had to make sure my girls know that when somebody says something that it's not okay, that you don't have to accept this. I think that there's that classic, don't tell your girls, oh, he likes you, when a boy is bullying them or something, and never indicate, even if you think they do, make it clear that is really not an okay reason to bully somebody.
Yeah, good advice. I remember being told as a child, like, complaining to my parents, oh, this boy in class is pulling my hair. And he's, oh, he likes you. And I'm like, but if he likes me, why is he being mean?
Yeah.
But this is the kind of narrative you get from your parents, and you grow up thinking this kind of behavior is okay. So, yeah, you're right in telling your girls, don't accept this behavior.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it can be tough sometimes because there's sometimes there's pressure, I think, from a lot of I don't know, maybe not everywhere, but I know in my girls' school sometimes the pressure to there's this conflict between the pressure to follow the rules and behave and be good versus to stand up for yourself. And there have been times that I've had to say to my kids when they're like, well, I got in trouble for punching a bully. And I'm like, okay, well, the school has rules, and you really, really can't punch a bully. But listen, when you're a teenager, if you're off on your own and some guy is being creepy to you, yeah, punch him, like you can do that. You don't have to take it. Because it can be a little creepy sometimes when you get this. And I think that a lot of times adults will crack down harder on girls for standing up for themselves in that kind of situation than they do on boys. Like, I look at boys roughhousing in a line together, and and the adults will be like, "Oh, boys will be boys. They're just shoving each other. Nobody's stopping. They're telling them that's no good." Whereas if a girl pushes somebody or punches somebody, then suddenly all the discipline comes down on them. Like, maybe we could balance that out and be, maybe we could treat them the same, and we wouldn't have a lot of these problems.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so I just want to put another comment up on from the audience. It's about what we were talking about previously about miscategorizing authors. And Misty306 says, J. Kristoff's Nevernight Chronicles trilogy, most librarians and bookstores continue to put the books in YA because the protagonist attends school, but actually it's a school for assassins, there's a lot of sex, violence, and death and blood. And the author has continually said it's not YA. So yeah, it happens a lot. I guess people just don't, as long as you're in school, it's someone who the character is somewhat of a teenager, and then you think, oh, it's YA, no matter what they go through.
Oh, really super not.
Yeah. Yeah, like you were saying, then a child or a young person is going to read the books which are totally inappropriate.
Yeah. And I mean, which isn't to say that teens should never read stuff with violence or sex in them or anything, but
Yeah.
it's good for them to know what they're getting into. And also, I think another thing is that honestly, there are times when even teens who can deal with violence, sex, and stuff in books will read adult fantasy and be bored because it's like
Yeah.
got heavy politics or a slow, sweeping start or something like that. And the last thing you want is for people to wind up turned off of female adult authors because they're trying to read them in the wrong age category, and it's not really towards them.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, actually, I was just thinking because your books are like that too. There's a lot of political intrigue in the background. It's really interesting stuff. But if you're not of the age to understand or appreciate that, then you'll be totally turned off, right?
Right. I've had people ask me like, "Can my kids read your books?" And I'm like, "Do they like politics?" Not a lot of 12-year-olds are really into political intrigue. If they are, be my guest. There's something to get see, but like they may appreciate it more when they're older.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm actually going to ask my last question because we've been talking for about an hour. It's actually a two-part question. So first of all, you've been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So a bit of an obvious question: why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
Well, I mean, obviously, violence against women is terrible, and it's a good thing to try and end. But I think it's particularly important for creators and to work against it, and storytellers to work against it, because I think fundamentally a lot of the problem is a failure of empathy. I think that there are a lot of people out there, unfortunately, who don't really see women and female presenting people as people. And I think that that's something that we are uniquely in position as storytellers to push against. And also that that storytellers have responsibility because so often stories have sensationalized violence against women. We also have a particular responsibility to try and fix it. And so that we have this power. It has historically been misused a lot by storytellers, and we have the power to try and make it better. And we should absolutely exercise that power because it's a real problem. And it's fundamentally, I think that so many of the problems in our world are caused one way or another by people who are culturally given a position of power, pushing down on people who they have been denying that power across the board, and violence against women is a large piece of that.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Whoops. I don't know what happened.
Sorry, my sound went a bit funny for a second.
Okay.
Okay, so final question, which is, what do you think authors such as yourself, who are read all over the world, can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Well, like I said, I think it's really important for us to write our female characters as people, to help foster that empathy and to treat female characters with respect, to not sensationalize violence against them and to not forgive it. I think it's very. I've read books, fantasy books and stuff, where the main character does some pretty terrible things, and it's like, oh, well, but they were going through a lot, and it gets forgiven or glossed over. And I think we have a responsibility not to do that, and to treat it with the gravity that it deserves as a real crime that is just as serious as any other violent crime. And also to portray female characters who are strong in a variety of ways, and not necessarily because of trauma, but just because they're female characters, this is what they want to do. And to emphasize the idea that trauma doesn't have to be part of a woman's life, but that if it is, it doesn't have to be all there is to that woman's life.
Okay, great. Sorry, your sound is a bit soft right now. I can't really hear. I didn't hear the last part of what you said. I don't know if it's just me or it's you.
Oh, sorry. I don't know.
Back now. It might be just my computer.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so another very quick comment from the audience. Chloe Merchant says, would it be a responsibility for storytellers to look at different cultures for answers to respond to tricky questions?
Absolutely. I think it is all too easy for us to be just rooted in our own culture, and being aware of other cultures and their expectations would certainly be, especially if you're trying to write in another culture that is not your own. Then you really, really, really need to be aware of so many things about their cultures. But yeah, I know. I think that's a great point, in that looking at things solely from, I'm an American, and goodness knows, Americans are often very guilty of not looking outside our own cultural perspective for answers to things. It's something that we all stand to do.
Sorry, Melissa, to interrupt. I couldn't hear the last part. Could you just repeat your last sentence?
Sure. I was just saying that certainly, for instance, I'm an American, and certainly a lot of American creators could stand to look beyond our own perspective to those of other cultures and understand them, and not just write as if we were the only perspective in the world, because that can cause a lot of problems too.
Okay. We're getting a few comments from the audience to actually repeat your answer to the last question I asked, which is, what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women? Because a lot of them didn't hear what you said.
Okay, I'll try and get up close and personal. Yeah. Sorry. What did I say? I'll answer it again, and maybe it'll be the same, and maybe it'll be different.
So, Melissa, what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Well, I think one thing that we can do is to make sure that we always present female characters in a respectful way, where we're not sensationalizing violence against them, or treating them as just as objects or prizes or colorful, sexy backdrops, but as real characters deserving of empathy and respect. And I think that, let's see. what else did I say? I think that that it's important for us to avoid sensationalizing violence against women, and I think that it's important for us to show that women. Oh, right, I remember the part. Okay, to show that strength doesn't have to come from trauma for a female character, but that characters who do have trauma don't have to be defined by that trauma. It's too often that you see, just like you see male characters who are defined by a woman's trauma, you also see female characters who are entirely defined by their trauma. It'd be nice if we move away from women's trauma as being just like the source of everybody's character motivation forever. That would be a good step.
Yeah, okay. Got it. That's a good answer. Worth repeating. Okay, so we've reached the end of our Q&A. Thank you, Melissa, for all the amazing answers you've given and a really good discussion. And thanks to the audience who asked questions. And I think you couldn't see it, but there's a really interesting discussion going on in the chat box about different books and different types of writing. So here I am again. I'm going to tell everybody about our stuff that we have up on the Rally Up fundraising page, some of which Melissa has donated. So like I said before, Melissa generously donated some goodies. One was the Swords and Fire goodie bundle, which has already been snapped up by Shai Ruparel. Thanks, Shai. But there is still one more thing left from Melissa, which is a 30-minute one-to-one video chat to be claimed by one Read for Pixels donor, who is an aspiring author. Melissa will be happy to chat about the art and craft of writing, the business of publishing, any little tips that you might want or need, or Melissa has some insider information. Or if you are a Melissa Caruso fan who would love to meet her via video chat, she's very happy to just chat about her books with you. And you may choose to do it by Skype or FaceTime. Or if you prefer a typed chat, Melissa is happy to oblige with that as well. And besides all of this awesome stuff from Melissa, we have plenty more author goodies available from authors including Kat Cho, Sarah Gailey, Maurice Brothers, Mick Gardner, RJ Barker, Kelly Garrett, Tamara Pierce, Elwyn Hamilton, Marshall Ryan Marqueza, and so many more. So we've raised so far $1,090 towards our $5,000 goal. So still a little bit of ways to go. Please do give generously before the fundraiser ends end of October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Now I'm going to try and share a little slide. Let's hope it works. We tried it earlier and okay, let's see. Yeah, it works. Okay, so here's our little slide with the links. So if you go to our Rally Up page, is bit.ly/R4P2020. It's case sensitive, but so Sam is typing. We'll put the link in the chat box, so you can just click there and go, and then look at all the wonderful, amazing things that we have for you. Meanwhile, if you want to find out more about Read for Pixels or the other authors that we have coming up, go to our Read for Pixels page, bit.ly/readforpixels, and the link will also go up in the chat box. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels, about the Pixel Project in general, about violence against women, what you can do about it, go and visit our website, the www.thepixelproject.net. Okay, so okay, so thanks everybody once again. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you to the audience for coming, and thank you for all the tough questions.
Welcome. Thank you for all the great answers. So Melissa and I will say goodbye to everybody.